let's start by jotting down absolute and comparative advantage. Absolute and comparative advantage. And the first thing we have to do is we got to make sure we know what these terms mean. Okay, so we'll start with absolute, and I'm going to abbreviate absolute advantage. And by definition, absolute advantage is just the ability to outproduce. Okay, say it's the ability to outproduce. So if we went back to our examples from Thursday and we started adding up, who was the best at making hammers or who was the best at making popcorn, those that were producing the most or drawing the most hammers and popcorn, they would have the absolute advantage. Okay? Second concept is comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, by definition, is the ability to produce at a lower cost than others. Say it's the ability to produce at a lower cost than others. So that takes us to kind of a whole new thing, right? Because when we were drawing hammers and popcorn, we weren't identifying, who was producing at a certain cost. All we were doing is we were just identifying who could produce how much stuff, right? Hammers and popcorn. So to be able to identify comparative advantage, we have to learn a process. Okay, there's a little process to doing that. We'll do that in just a minute. But the last definition that we have to put down is what we call the law of comparative advantage. Law of comparative advantage. And what this law of comparative advantage represents is it's that producers should produce, we'll put producers should produce what they have the comparative advantage in, what they have the comparative advantage in and trade for other goods. Trade for other goods. And economists live by this law of comparative advantage. So what we need to understand is, in the world of trade or specializing in trade, okay, an economist does not care how much somebody can produce. An economist cares about what's your cost of production, and let's figure out who can produce at the lower cost, and then we'll have you specialize in what you can produce at the lowest cost and then trade for other things. Okay? So this law of comparative advantage here, this is important. You're going to want to make sure we remember that. Okay? Because when we're talking about specializing in trade, this is where we're always going to go, this law of comparative advantage. Okay? So we need to come up with an example here. Okay? And I think I'm going to start fresh. Everybody have this down? We good? Okay. So our example is going to be, we have two countries, and I'm going to draw a table here. Whenever we do comparative advantage problems, okay, you're always going to want to create a table. A lot of times questions will be given to you, like I'm going to put them here. If they're not, you're going to want to take the numbers and you're going to want to create your own little table and chart. So our table is going to look something like this. We have two countries. In our example, we're going to have the United States and Vietnam. And in our two countries, we can make two goods. They are going to be shrimp and computers. Shrimp and computers are our two goods that we're going to produce. Okay? Two countries, two goods. So it's almost like, you know, on Thursday we had everyone in here produce two goods, hammers and popcorn, right? And it'd be like if we're taking two individuals and we're comparing their hammer and popcorn production. Well, that's what we're doing with the U.S. and Vietnam for catching shrimp and producing computers. And we're going to say that in the U.S., we are able to produce, or catch, 3 shrimp. And that would probably really be like 3 tons of shrimp. And we are able to produce 9 computers. And in Vietnam, they can catch 2 tons of shrimp and produce 3 computers. So if we were going to compare this info, okay, automatically, hopefully, we recognize that the United States has the absolute advantage in producing both shrimp and computers, right? Because we can outproduce Vietnam. But remember, we're not concerned about absolute advantage. We want to try to figure out, based on the law of comparative advantage, who should specialize, or who has the comparative advantage, and who should specialize in producing each. Good. So I'm going to walk you through a process to do this. Okay, so I'm going to put underneath here number 1, and we need to calculate the cost. So I'm going to put here calculate costs. And I'm going to say for each country. So I'm going to focus on just the United States, and then I'm going to focus on just Vietnam when I'm calculating these costs. Okay? So, and I'm going to add one thing. Okay? One rule to live by when we're calculating costs is other over. Other over. So let's look at the United States. Okay? Got to calculate the costs for the United States. So what I need to do is in the U.S., I want to figure out what does 1 shrimp equal to. So I'm in the shrimp box for the United States. Okay? Shrimp box for the United States. And I want to know what does 1 shrimp equal to. Now to determine that or figure that out, I'm just going to stick with the rule other over. So I'm looking just at the U.S. 1 shrimp equals other over, which is going to be 9/3. 9 over 3. Okay, I'm just looking at the U.S. So I'll put here 9 over 3. I wish I would have made my boxes a little bigger. But simplified, 9 over 3 is equal to 3. And it's always, the cost is always going to be in terms of the other good. So 1 shrimp would be equal to 3 computers. Okay? So I want to label this with a little C here. So that's 3 computers. I wish I could squeeze it in there better, but that's as good as I can. Okay? So let's just talk about what that means. That means that when the United States decides that they are going to go and catch a ton of shrimp, okay, they can do that, but that means that they're going to give up the opportunity to make 3 computers. That's the cost. Remember, the cost is always what you give up. So if I want a ton of shrimp, I can get a ton of shrimp, but that means I'm going to miss out on the opportunity to make 3 computers. Okay? Let's do the same thing for computers. I'm in the computer box for the United States, so one computer is equal to other over, which is going to be, looking just at the U.S., 3 over 9, which is equal to 1/3 of, and remember the cost is always in terms of the other good, so it's going to be 1/3 of a shrimp. I'll put a box around that because that's my cost. I'll do the same thing here. 3 computers, that's my cost. So now I know in the U.S., every time they make one shrimp, it costs them 3 computers. Every time they make one computer, it costs them 1/3 of a shrimp. Okay? I'm going to do the same thing for Vietnam now. Focusing just on Vietnam, one shrimp, because I'm in the shrimp box, is going to be other over, which is 3 halves of a computer. That's our cost. One shrimp equals 3 halves of a computer. And one computer equals 2/3 of a shrimp. Questions on how I got that? Now I know in each country, every time they make a shrimp and every time they make a computer, what they give up or what their cost is. Okay? Step 2, that down here, is I'm going to compare costs now. Compare costs between countries. Compare costs between countries. Now remember, okay, when we looked at the definition for comparative advantage, we said that you had the comparative advantage if you can produce at the lowest cost. So I'm going to put underneath here, lowest cost wins. That'll be a good rule to live by. Lowest cost wins. So let's just look at shrimp now, because I'm comparing costs between countries. So when I look at shrimp, the U.S., the cost is 3 computers. Vietnam, the cost is 3 halves of a computer. Lowest cost wins. That means that Vietnam should specialize, or they have the comparative advantage in producing shrimp. Okay? So we'll put under here, Vietnam equals shrimp. Now, why would Vietnam, or why should Vietnam produce shrimp? Because they can produce shrimp at a lower cost than the United States. And all I'm doing is comparing the 3 computers that the U.S. gives up to the 3 halves of a computer that Vietnam gives up. Whoever gives up the smallest amount has the comparative advantage in producing that good. Okay? So when I look at computers, I know that 1/3 of a shrimp is less than 2/3 of a shrimp. So that means that the U.S. has the comparative advantage in producing computers. So we'll put U.S. equals computers. Now, why should the U.S. produce computers? Because when I'm looking at computers here, 1/3 shrimp than I'm comparing costs. Whoever has the lowest cost is going to win or has the comparative advantage. So I know then that the U.S. has a lower cost than Vietnam's. The U.S. has okay? So what does this mean? In real life, if the United States has the comparative advantage in producing computers and Vietnam has the comparative advantage in producing shrimp, both countries are going to specialize in producing those goods. They're going to overproduce, right? So Vietnam is going to make or catch more shrimp than they need. And the U.S. is going to make more computers than they need. And then we're going to trade to get those other things. Okay? And that's what the law of comparative advantage states, is you specialize what you have the comparative advantage in, and you trade to get those other goods that you're not specializing in. Okay? What would happen if the United States would all of a sudden start producing shrimp? Would that be a good idea? It wouldn't be, because they had the advantage in producing computers because we can do it at a lower cost. They'd be wasting resources to try to produce shrimp on their own. Even though we can outproduce Vietnam, it still would be a waste of resources because they can produce at a lower cost than us. They should specialize in producing what they have the lowest cost in. Same with the United States, and then we trade. And both countries are going to find it advantageous when they do that. Okay? All right. The minimize this.